Now that we've got variables working and we can do calculations, we have two last pieces that we need to add to our program before we can do some interesting things. We need input and we need output. Input is getting information from the user. Output is displaying information back to the user. We're going to start with output, and we can do this, and I've created a blank class here with a blank main method. We can do this using something called system.out.print. And system.out.print is a method. So we have parentheses here. Anything we put in these parentheses will get displayed on the screen. So if I put 3 in parentheses, when I run the program, we'll get a 3 out in the console down here, which is the program running. Instead of 3, maybe I type hello. You'll notice it's a string, so it needs to be between quotes. If I just type the word hello, it'll think it's a variable and get confused. But with quotes there, when we run the program, we should get hello down as the output at the bottom. We can display things one after another. So if I say hello and Susan, those first it will display hello, next it'll display Susan. Now this won't quite do what we want it to, because you'll notice there's no space there. Every print is just displayed one after the next. So somewhere in here I need a space, and now we've got hello Susan. So that works really well. Sometimes I might want to put something on the next line, however. I might want the next thing I say, how are you today, to go on to the next line. And right now everything is just getting displayed on the same line. I do that using, I've got a couple different options, but the first is using a special character called a new line character. And that is this \n. The backslash tells us this is going to be a special character. We're not just going to display the n on the screen. The n says it's a new line special character. We've actually got a few different ones, but right now we'll just stick with the new line. So now it'll display hello Susan, and then the new line means go down to the next line. How are you today should appear on the next line afterwards. So sure enough, hello Susan, and then it goes down to the new line, how are you today. We have another alternative. Instead of displaying that new line, instead of typing it in ourselves, we can change this from a print to a print line. Print line means print what you've got here and then go down to the next line. So it's really the same as having that \n there. And we'll run the program and we should get the exact same output at the bottom. Now that's great for a simple program, but for anything more complicated we really are going to want some variables and to print what's in the variables. So we have the same 3 variables that we started with last time. I've got to fix the name there a little bit because the quotes weren't quite right getting copied and pasted. But we've got our same 3 variables from before. We might want to print something like the name. And we do that just by putting name in the parentheses. You'll notice we have no quotes. If we put quotes there, it would literally put the word name on the screen. We don't have quotes, so it figures out, well, name is a variable. I'll put whatever the information in that variable is. So this will display Abdullah on our screen. We might want to say something like system.out.print your name is, and then the name. And sure enough, we can do that. So it'll display your name is, and then it'll display whatever is in that name variable. Now you can picture if we have a lot of output, this gets to be a little bit of a pain to have a whole bunch of print lines one after the next. What we can do is actually combine things. So instead of having a separate print statement for name, I'm going to use a plus sign here and say your name is plus name. That's going to combine these two things, and it just means when we've got text, you have the first piece of text and then you add the next piece of text after it. So it's going to have the exact same output as before. We run this program and we get your name is Abdullah. So these two things get combined just by putting the name after the first piece of text, and then it gets displayed. We can do that. It doesn't have to be strings, so we could say, for example, you were born in, and use year born. That'll get combined in the same way. So this 1998 will get added to you were born in, and we'll get a display here, you were born in 1998. You have to be a little bit careful, because if we say print GPA plus year born, that won't display the two of them, that'll add the two up and display it. But almost always when we're using a print line, or excuse me, a print or print line, we'll have something in quotes. As soon as we start adding to that, it'll put them one after another. I've added a little bit of code here to our print, so it will print out all three pieces of information. And you can see the one problem we're running into, which is that this gets a little bit ugly. We have a whole bunch of things being added together. We have to put the spaces in the right place, so your name is space name, space and you were born in, space you're born. Then there's a period right at the beginning of this quote. Your GPA is, and then the GPA. I actually just noticed that I forgot the period at the end of the quote. This works. When we run it, we'll get what we want at the bottom, but it's not particularly ideal. There's an alternative, and it's great for things like this where we're inserting a bunch of separate pieces of information. And we'll actually see some places in the future where it's even more helpful with some alternative options. But that is called printf. So instead of print or print line, this is printf. Printf, what we do is we type what we want to show up on the screen all in one place. We just use a couple of placeholders for information. So we're going to say your name is, and then here's where we want the name to go. We're going to say %s, and the name is going to go there. We'll see how we get it there in a second. And you were born in %d. That's where the year is going to go. Put the period. Your GPA is %f, another period. And that's what we want to show up on the screen. I apologize, my font is pretty big here, so you can't see it all in one spot. But we've got this printf where here's what we want on the screen, and we just have a couple of placeholders, 3 placeholders, I guess, where some extra information will go. The next thing we have to do with our printf is to tell it what information goes in those placeholders. So the first placeholder is the name, %s. So we'll go to the end. We'll put a comma, and we'll say name. This piece of information should go in that first placeholder. Now we'll do another comma, and you'll notice we're doing commas, not plus signs. Plus signs would be saying add it to the end of this. We are using commas that will say take this information and put it in the placeholder. So that's the first placeholder. The next placeholder is the year the person was born. So I'm going to put year born. And the third and final placeholder is the GPA. I'll put GPA. So we start with a format string, and then we give the information that goes in the placeholders in order. So the first placeholder, we want the name, so we give it the name first. Then the year, we give it the year second. Then the GPA is third. When we run this, this should behave in exactly the same way as our previous one. We have a tiny bit different here where we've got a lot of digits after the decimal, but other than that, it's behaving in exactly the same way. So this works almost the exact same as a print, but a lot of times if you're inserting information into it, it's a little bit easier, it's a little bit cleaner to do it this way. And like I said, we'll see some advantages to this in the future when we get back to this. You'll notice I've used different percentages, and I didn't mention it or didn't explain this before. A %s means I'm going to put a string here. So name is a string, it has to match that %s. %d means an integer. I apologize, I have no explanation for why that's called a d. %f is for double. That's because if you remember, initially before doubles we used floats. That's where the %f comes from. But it works for doubles as well. So an s for a string, an f for a float, those make perfect sense, except we now use doubles. The d for an integer, I don't have a good explanation for. But those pieces of information then we provide at the end. One last thing is, what if we mess up with our information here. So what if I'm giving it a string, but I say it's going to be an integer? When I run it, I'm going to get an exception down here, and it's going to tell me that if I go to the very top, an illegal format conversion exception, and it actually gives me some nice information here. D, this means is not equal to java.lang.string. I said I was going to get a D, and then I gave it a string, and it's saying D is not what you're supposed to use for a string. So there are two options there. In this case, I put the wrong percentage thing here, but it also may be that I had the correct placeholder and I had the wrong variable, or the variables in the wrong order. So if you get this illegal format conversion exception, look at your placeholders and make sure that they match, that the %s matches with a string, the %d matches with an int, and the %f matches with a double or a float. Now, one last thing, you'll notice this line of code is really long. We really should be breaking this up a little bit. At a bare minimum, I'm going to press enter here and move the name, the year born, and the GPA down to the next line. This is still pretty long. It's really because I've got a huge font here so you can see it a little bit better. But we can also break this up a little bit. We might say, put a quote there, a plus sign, and then start the rest of the text down here. I'll hit tab so it kind of scoots over a little bit. We're allowed to break this up into multiple pieces. We just need to put a plus sign to combine these two strings together so that they combine to form the format string, and then we'll have the comma afterwards and have name, year born, and GPA after that. So it still works perfectly even if it's broken up onto a few lines. And you'll notice that we kind of indent this a little bit. I just hit the tab key to scooch it over. That way all the starts of the lines are in one place, and the fact that this is kind of continued from up above is pretty clear to read because it's scooched over.